During World War II, many catastrophic military mistakes were made by both Axis and Allied powers. These mistakes resulted in the loss of countless lives, valuable resources, and strategic advantages. In this video, we will examine several of the most significant military mistakes of the war, including the German invasion of the Soviet Union, the Battle of Stalingrad, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and the bombing of Dresden. Let's go with the first catastrophic military mistake of the war, which was the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. Nazi Germany was at the height of its power, having conquered much of Europe. Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, believed that the Soviet Union posed a threat to German expansion and sought to eliminate the threat by invading the country. The invasion, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, was a massive military undertaking that involved over 3 million German soldiers. The Germans were initially successful, advancing deep into Soviet territory and capturing vast amounts of territory, and inflicting heavy casualties on Soviet forces. However, the invasion was ultimately a failure, as the Germans were unable to achieve their objectives of capturing Moscow, Leningrad, and other major Soviet cities. The invasion was a catastrophic mistake for the Germans for several reasons. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, was able to mount a strong resistance against the invading forces. First, it was a massive drain on their resources, both in terms of manpower and equipment. Second, it exposed the Germans to the harsh winter conditions of the Eastern Front, which they were ill prepared to handle. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was able to mobilize its vast resources and manpower to push the Germans back. And by 1943, the invasion led to a brutal and costly war of attrition with the Soviet Union, which ultimately weakened the German military, hastened their defeat, and led to their surrender in 1945. The German invasion of the Soviet Union was a catastrophic mistake that cost millions of lives and drained Germany of its resources. It is now widely recognized as one of the major turning points of World War II, and its consequences had far-reaching implications for the course of the war and the post-war. Now, moving on to another catastrophic mistake made by the Germans in Russia. Still during the invasion, which, as we said, it was a mistake, Germany still had a chance to defeat the Soviet Union if they worked on a steady and well-thought strategy. But Hitler's overconfidence led him to believe that he should take over Stalingrad to embarrass Stalin, which led him to lose a vast number of his troops. The Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. The German army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, launched an offensive against the city of Stalingrad in the summer of 1942. The city was a major industrial center and an important transportation hub for the Soviet Union, and its capture would have given the Germans a significant advantage in the war. However, the battle turned into brutal urban warfare that lasted for months, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The Germans made several critical mistakes during the battle, including underestimating the strength and determination of the Soviet defenders and overextending their supply lines. In November 1942, the Soviet Red Army launched a counteroffensive that encircled the German forces in Stalingrad, trapping them in a pocket. The Germans were unable to break out of the pocket, and after months of desperate fighting, Paulus surrendered his army in February 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad was a significant military mistake for the Germans, as it cost them a large number of troops, weakened their positions on the Eastern Front, and gave the Soviet Union a major boost in morale. Let's go to the third catastrophic mistake, but this time from the Japanese side. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in December 1941 was another catastrophic military mistake of the war. The attack, which caught the United States by surprise, was intended to cripple the US Pacific Fleet and prevent the US from interfering in Japanese military operations in Southeast Asia. The Japanese military leaders who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor believed that it would be a decisive blow. However, at the time, the US was still a neutral country and had been supplying arms and other resources to the Allies, but had not yet entered the war. The attack on Pearl Harbor, which killed over 2,400 Americans and destroyed or damaged numerous ships and planes, prompted the US to declare war on Japan the following day. The attack had the opposite effect, galvanizing the US into action. The Japanese offensive was a critical mistake for the Japanese for several reasons. First, it led to the US declaration of war against Japan, which in turn led to the US entering the war on the side of the Allies. Second, it united the American people behind the war effort, which gave the US the strength and resources needed to fight a long and difficult war. The attack on Pearl Harbor became a rallying cry for the US, and President Roosevelt famously referred to it as a date which will live in infamy. Finally, the attack was a strategic blunder as it failed to destroy the US Pacific Fleet and left the Japanese vulnerable to future US attacks. Although the Japanese succeeded in destroying or damaging many ships and planes at Pearl Harbor, they failed to destroy the key targets, including the oil storage tanks and repair facilities. Additionally, the US aircraft carriers, which were the most valuable assets of the Pacific Fleet, were not at Pearl Harbor at the time of the attack and were therefore not damaged. In the end, the attack on Pearl Harbor was a costly mistake for Japan, as it ultimately led to the country's defeat in World War II. The US mobilized its resources and industrial might and was able to defeat the Japanese forces in the Pacific, culminating in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, which brought the war to an end. Let's go now from Japan to the bombing of Dresden. This move was insignificant strategically speaking. The Allied bombing of Dresden in February 1945 was another catastrophic military mistake of the war. The bombing, which was carried out by British and American aircraft, was intended to destroy the city's industrial capacity and disrupt German military operations. However, the bombing resulted in the death of tens of thousands of civilians and the destruction of much of the city's historic center. The bombing was a critical mistake for the Allies for several reasons. Dresden was an important cultural center and industrial hub in the eastern part of Germany. The city was largely untouched by the war and had not been heavily targeted by the Allies, who were primarily focused on destroying German military targets. However, on February 13, 1945, the Allies launched a massive bombing raid on Dresden. The bombing was carried out by a force of 800 British and American bombers, which dropped over 3,900 tons of bombs on the city over the course of 2 days. The bombing was intended to disrupt German military operations and destroy key industrial targets, as well as to disrupt transportation and communication networks. The bombing had a devastating effect on the city, which was largely made of wood and other flammable materials. The bombing caused a massive firestorm that raged through the city and destroying buildings and engulfing people in flames. Many people were trapped in buildings that collapsed as a result of the bombing, while others were burned alive or suffocated in the flames. The exact number of people who died in the bombing of Dresden is difficult to determine, but it is estimated that at least 25,000 people were killed, many of whom were civilians. The bombing also left many more people injured and homeless, with much of the city reduced to rubble. The bombing of Dresden remains a controversial event to this day. The event has been the subject of much debate and discussion, and it remains a reminder of the devastating impact of war. At the end, wars are responsible for many catastrophic events. But in this video, we tackle the 4 catastrophic military events that led to the end of the World War II. I hope you have enjoyed watching this video. If you did, like it, subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos.